The cargo bay of Station Kepler smelled like recycled air and engine grease, same as it did every morning when Tyler Hayes clocked in for his maintenance shift. He'd been working the station's lower decks for almost 15 years now, long enough that the hum of the life support systems felt more familiar than silence. Most days were routine. Fix a leaking coolant line here, replace a burnt-out panel there, maybe share a meal with whatever traders happened to be docked that week. The station sat on the edge of civilized space, a stopping point for ships that needed repairs or supplies before venturing into the unmapped sectors beyond. It wasn't glamorous, but Tyler had made peace with that long ago. That morning started like any other until Tyler heard it, a sound that didn't belong among the mechanical groans and hisses of the bay. He paused, wrench in hand, listening. There it was again. A cry. Not the electronic whine of a failing system, but something organic. Something alive. His heart picked up speed as he followed the sound between stacked cargo containers, past the docking clamps for visiting ships, until he found an emergency supply crate tucked against the far wall. The crate hadn't been there yesterday. He was certain of that. Tyler knelt down and carefully opened the magnetic seal. Inside, wrapped in thermal blankets that were still warm, was an infant. A human infant. The baby couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, small and fragile in a way that made Tyler's hands shake as he lifted the child out. But it was the eyes that stopped him cold. They were open, staring up at him with an awareness that seemed impossible for someone so young. And they were gold. Not hazel or light brown, but genuine metallic gold, like someone had captured sunlight and trapped it in those tiny irises. Tyler searched the crate frantically for any kind of message, identification chip, or even a handwritten note. Nothing. Just the baby, the blankets, and a half-empty bottle of formula. Someone had left this child here deliberately, hidden where casual workers wouldn't look, but where someone doing a thorough maintenance check would eventually find them. The realization hit him hard. Someone had trusted that this station, this community of misfits and wanderers, would do the right thing. Tyler wrapped the baby back in the blankets and headed straight for the station administrator's office, his mind already racing through the implications of what he'd found. The next few hours became a blur of medical scans, security footage reviews, and increasingly frustrated calls to nearby stations and passing ships. The station's small medical bay confirmed the child was healthy, well-fed, and entirely human according to every genetic marker they could test. Except for those eyes. Dr. Nina Cross, who'd been patching up station residents for a decade, admitted she'd never seen anything like it. Not a mutation, not a cosmetic enhancement, just eyes that happened to be gold. The security footage showed a cloaked figure entering the cargo bay during the third shift, when most of the station slept. They moved with purpose, placed the crate, and left within minutes. The cloak disrupted the cameras enough that no identifying features were visible. By evening, word had spread through the station like electricity through circuits. Station Kepler housed maybe 300 permanent residents and saw another few hundred transients at any given time, depending on the shipping routes. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, for better or worse. Tyler found himself in the station's common area, the baby still in his arms because the child seemed to cry whenever anyone else tried to hold him, surrounded by what felt like half the station's population. There were humans, sure, but also VRNN with their crystalline features, Colthan traders with their broad frames and gentle dispositions, even a few Sessic whose clicking language Tyler had never quite mastered. "We should contact council services," someone suggested. "They have protocols for abandoned children." "Protocols that'll dump him in some processing center for months while they search for parents who clearly don't want to be found," Gina Moore countered. She ran the station's only decent cafe and had a reputation for speaking her mind. "Look at him. You really want to ship him off to some sterile facility?" Tyler looked down at the baby, who had finally stopped crying and was now watching the gathered crowd with those impossible golden eyes. There was something in that gaze, something that made Tyler feel seen in a way he couldn't quite explain. "What if we kept him here?" The words came out before he'd fully thought them through. "This station raised me after my parents died in that transport accident. We've got people from 24 species living here together just fine. We could raise one more." The debate went on for hours, but in the end, the decision felt inevitable. Station Kepler would keep the child. They'd register him with the minimal information required, list Tyler as guardian since he'd been the one to find him, and raise him as their own. Gina suggested the name Eli, simple and easy for most species to pronounce. It stuck. What none of them knew, what they couldn't have known, was that 3 sectors away, a message had already been received by the local Galactic Council administrator. A routine genetic scan from the medical bay, automatically transmitted as part of standard health protocols, had flagged something in the child's DNA. Something that shouldn't exist. The administrator, a bureaucrat named Ven who'd been assigned to this backwater station as punishment for a career of mediocrity, dismissed it as a scanner malfunction. But the flag went into the system anyway, waiting for someone who might recognize its significance. And far across the galaxy, in archives that hadn't been accessed in millennia, an ancient protocol stirred to life. 16 years passed on Station Kepler, and Eli Hayes had grown into something the station residents couldn't quite define but universally loved. He worked alongside Tyler in maintenance now, learning the systems that kept their home running. The golden eyes that had marked him as different when he was an infant had become just another part of who he was to the people who'd raised him. Sure, visiting traders sometimes stared and new arrivals asked questions, but on Kepler, Eli was just Eli, the kid who remembered everyone's birthday, who could fix a plasma relay faster than anyone half again his age, and who somehow always knew when someone needed a friend. It was his gift for understanding people that set him apart more than his eyes ever could. Eli had a way of making everyone feel heard, whether they spoke standard galactic or some dialect from the outer reaches that barely anyone else recognized. He'd grown up surrounded by dozens of species, and somewhere along the way he developed an intuition for communication that went beyond words. When the Colthan engineer Breck was struggling to explain a complex repair to Tyler, Eli would step in and somehow bridge the gap. When tensions flared between visiting crews over docking priorities, Eli could walk into the middle of it and have everyone laughing within minutes. Tyler had long since stopped trying to figure out how his son did it. That's what Eli was to him now, officially adopted when the boy turned 10 and no one had ever come looking for him. Some things you just accepted, like how recyclers always made that weird clicking noise on Thursdays, or how Gina's coffee tasted different depending on her mood. Eli's ability to connect with people was just part of who he was. The day everything changed started ordinary enough. A VRNN diplomatic vessel had docked for emergency repairs, their quantum drive having suffered a cascade failure midway through a jump. The VRNN were old, one of the founding species of the Galactic Council, and they carried themselves with the quiet dignity of a race that had been exploring the stars when humanity was still figuring out agriculture. Their diplomat, a being named Cristal, had taken ill during the failed jump. The ship's medical officer explained it to Dr. Cross with obvious distress. Their diplomat's mind had fractured, a catastrophic breakdown that occasionally afflicted VRNN after traumatic quantum exposure. There's no treatment, the medical officer said, their crystalline features dimmed with grief. Once the mind fractures, it cannot be repaired. We will care for him, but Cristal as he was is gone. The news spread through the station quickly, and with it came a somber mood. The VRNN had been good neighbors over the years, always respectful, always fair in their dealings. To lose someone this way felt cruel. Eli heard about it during his lunch break and felt something pull at his chest, an urge he couldn't quite name. He found himself walking toward the medical bay without really deciding to go there. Dr. Cross tried to stop him at the door. Eli, honey, there's nothing we can do. The VRNN have their own medical team handling things. I know, Eli said, but his feet kept moving. I just want to see if there's anything I can help with. He found Cristal in a private room, the diplomat's crystalline body lying motionless on an examination table while monitoring equipment hummed around him. The VRNN medical officer sat nearby, keeping vigil. Cristal's eyes were open but vacant, staring at nothing, seeing nothing. The sight made something ache deep in Eli's chest. He approached slowly, respectfully, and without really thinking about it, he reached out and placed his hand on Cristal's arm. The effect was immediate and impossible. Eli felt something flow out of him, not physical but not quite mental either, something that lived in the space between thought and feeling. It was like being connected to another person's emotional frequency, sensing the fractured pieces of their mind scattered like broken glass. And somehow, impossibly, Eli could see how they fit together. His golden eyes began to glow, actually glow with a soft light that filled the room. The monitoring equipment started chirping frantically as Cristal's readings spiked and then stabilized into patterns the machines had never recorded before. Cristal's vacant eyes suddenly focused. The diplomat drew in a sharp breath and sat up, their crystalline features brightening with returned awareness. I was lost, Cristal said, their voice shaking. I was scattered across the dark and then there was light. Golden light that showed me the way home. The medical officer stood so quickly their chair clattered backward. They stared at Eli with something that looked like terror and wonder mixed together. Dr. Cross, who'd followed Eli into the room, had one hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Tyler, who'd come running when the equipment alarms went off, stood frozen in the doorway. How did you do that? The VRNN medical officer whispered. Humans don't have telepathic abilities. Your species can't even sense the quantum fields that carry thought. What you just did is impossible. Eli pulled his hand back, suddenly aware that everyone was staring at him. His eyes had stopped glowing, returning to their normal golden color, but he could still feel the echo of that connection, like a ringing in his ears that wouldn't quite fade. I don't know, he said honestly. I just felt like I needed to help, and then I could sort of see what was wrong and I knew how to fix it. Cristal rose from the examination table, moving with a grace that had been absent during their arrival. The diplomat approached Eli and studied his face with an intensity that made the young man want to step back. But Cristal's focus kept returning to his eyes, those golden eyes that had been with Eli since birth. Something shifted in the diplomat's expression, recognition dawning like sunrise. Your eyes? Cristal said softly. I have seen eyes like yours before, but only in the oldest archives and records that date back to before the Council's founding. They belonged to a people called the Orphan, and they were said to carry a gift for healing minds and bringing understanding between species. But the Orphan vanished 10,000 years ago. They should not exist anymore. What are you saying? Tyler asked, moving to stand protectively near his son. Cristal turned to face them all, and now there was definitely fear in those crystalline features. I am saying that this young human should not be possible. And I am saying that there are those in the council who will be very interested to learn that he exists. The diplomat reached into their robes and pulled out a communication device. I must report this. I have no choice, it is protocol for any discovery of this magnitude. But I will make sure they know that Eli saved my life. Perhaps that will matter. The message was sent within the hour, encrypted and marked with the highest priority codes. It contained medical scans, visual recordings of what Eli had done, and Cristal's personal testimony. And attached to it were 2 words in an ancient dialect that only the eldest council members would recognize: they've returned. Across the galaxy in the council's central chambers, alarms began to sound. The Galactic Council's emergency chamber hadn't been activated in over 200 years. It was a space designed for crisis, buried deep within the central station that served as the council's heart. When the alert came through, flagged with ancient priority codes that most current administrators didn't even recognize, it triggered protocols that pulled the eldest members from whatever corners of the galaxy they currently occupied. Within hours, beings who rarely gathered in the same physical space were assembled, their faces projected on holographic displays that ringed the circular room. Chancellor Vorith, a Sessic who'd served on the council for 90 years, pulled up the message that had caused this unprecedented gathering. The footage played in the center of the room, a young human with golden eyes placing his hand on a fractured Vieronin diplomat, light emanating from those impossible eyes, and then the diplomat sitting up, whole and healed. Vorith watched it 3 times, feeling a cold dread settle into their multiple hearts. It could be a hoax, suggested Council Member Thane, though his voice carried no conviction. Humans have been known to fake extraordinary abilities for attention. The medical scans are genuine, replied Dr. Velis, the Council's chief medical advisor. I've verified them personally. This human somehow rewove the neural patterns of a fractured VRYN mind. That ability hasn't existed in this galaxy since. She trailed off, unwilling to finish the sentence. Since the Orphan walked among us, Vorith completed quietly. Which means we have a problem that goes far beyond one unusual human on a border station. The younger council members shifted uncomfortably, clearly confused by the tension radiating from their elders. Council member Petra Lang, one of only 3 humans to hold a council seat, spoke up. I don't understand. The historical records mention the Orphan as mediators and peacekeepers who helped establish the early council. If this boy carries their bloodline, isn't that a good thing? The silence that followed her question was heavy enough to feel. Finally, Vorith stood, their aged form moving slowly to the center of the chamber. I am going to share something with you that has been kept secret for 10,000 years. The Orphan were indeed peacekeepers and mediators. Their gift for understanding, for healing broken minds and bridging impossible divides, made them invaluable during the Council's formation. Species that had been at war for centuries found common ground when an Orphan facilitated the discussion. Trade disputes that threatened to destabilize entire sectors were resolved with their guidance. That sounds admirable, Petra said, still not understanding the fear in the room. It was, Vorith agreed. Until the founding races realized something terrifying. The Orphan weren't just facilitating peace, they were becoming necessary for it. Species began to refuse negotiations unless an Orphan was present. Their influence grew so profound that the council itself began to defer to their judgment on matters of law and governance. We were becoming administrators of a system they controlled through pure moral authority. Another elder, Cross of the Colthan, took up the story. His deep voice carried shame that seemed to age him further. The founding species grew afraid. Not of conquest or violence, but of irrelevance. The Aurum had no armies, no weapons, no territory. They simply understood people better than anyone else, and that understanding gave them a power we couldn't control or counter. So we did something unforgivable. The holographic display shifted, showing ancient documents written in dialects that predated modern Standard Galactic. Petra read them with growing horror. You scattered them, she whispered. You deliberately spread the Aurum across primitive worlds, planets that hadn't achieved space flight yet, places where they'd be isolated and their gifts would be diluted over generations. We told ourselves it was for the greater good, Vorith said, and the self-loathing in their voice was palpable. That the galaxy needed to learn to stand on its own, without depending on the Aurum to solve every dispute. We erased them from the official records, made them legends and myths. And we built a council that maintained order through carefully managed balance rather than through unity. You mean through controlled conflict, Petra said, her voice sharp. Through making sure species need the council to mediate their disputes. Through ensuring that unity never becomes strong enough to make our authority irrelevant. The accusation hung in the air. No one denied it. Earth was one of those primitive worlds, Petra continued, piecing it together. You put Aurum there. And now, 10,000 years later, their bloodline has produced this boy, Eli. Which presents us with an impossible choice, Vorith said. If word spreads about what this human can do, species across the galaxy will begin questioning why such abilities were lost in the first place. They'll search the archives, find the gaps in our history, start asking uncomfortable questions about the Council's founding principles. So what are you suggesting? Petra demanded. That we eliminate a 16-year-old boy because he's inconvenient? Of course not, Cross rumbled, though he didn't sound entirely certain. But we must retrieve him quietly, bring him to a secure facility where his abilities can be studied and contained. For his own protection, naturally. There are many in the galaxy who would seek to exploit someone with his gifts. And while he's in this secure facility, he'll conveniently stay silent about what he represents, Petra said flatly. Another 10,000 years of keeping the truth buried. Vorith's communication device chirped. They glanced at it and their features shifted into something that might have been relief or might have been deeper dread. The decision may have been taken from us. Kristall's report wasn't as private as we'd hoped. Several junior council members have already accessed it. The story is spreading through the administrative channels. Within days, maybe hours, every major news network in civilized space will be running features on the human with golden eyes who can heal broken minds. Then we move quickly, another elder said. Send a retrieval team to Station Kepler immediately. Quiet, professional, non-military. We bring the boy to the central station for his own safety, before someone less scrupulous decides to claim him. Who do we send? Cross asked. Vorith pulled up a personnel file. The hologram showed a human woman in council security uniform, her service record long and decorated, but her recent performance reviews suggested someone going through the motions rather than believing in the mission. Diane Foster. 20 years with council security, multiple commendations, currently stationed 3 jumps from Kepler. Her record shows she questions orders but ultimately follows them. She'll retrieve the boy without unnecessary violence. And if the station resists? Someone asked. It's a maintenance station on the edge of nowhere, Vorith said dismissively. A few hundred people who fix ships and trade supplies. What are they going to do against council authority? Petra Lang stood abruptly. I'm voting against this action. Whatever you're calling it, however you're justifying it, we're essentially kidnapping a child to cover up the council's historical crimes. I want that on record. So noted, Vorith said. But the vote passes regardless. Diane Foster's team leaves within the hour. And may whatever gods still watch this galaxy forgive us for what we're about to do. The holographic conference dissolved, leaving only Vorith and Petra in the physical chamber. The human council member turned to her elder colleague, her eyes hard. You know this won't end the way you think it will. That boy didn't grow up isolated on some primitive world. He grew up on a station full of people from dozens of species who all love him. You're not just taking him from one human guardian, you're taking him from an entire community. I know, Vorith said quietly. But the alternative is watching the entire council structure collapse when the truth comes out. Sometimes there are no good choices, Petra. Only less terrible ones. Petra left without another word, already composing a message in her mind. She couldn't stop the retrieval team officially, but she could make sure someone on Station Kepler knew they were coming. Sometimes the best thing a person in power could do was a little strategic disobedience. She just hoped it would be enough. The message reached Tyler at 3 in the morning, station time. He'd been asleep for maybe an hour when his personal comm device started buzzing with an encrypted priority signal. Years of maintenance work had trained him to wake up fast when alarms went off, so he was reading the message before his brain had fully caught up with being conscious. It came from someone identifying themselves only as a friend on the council, and the contents made his blood run cold. Council security team en route to Kepler. Arrival in 6 hours. Orders to retrieve Eli Hayes for indefinite detention. Justification classified. This is not a request. They will take him by force if necessary. I'm sorry. I tried to stop this. Tyler was out of bed and pulling on clothes before he'd finished reading it a second time. He sent quick messages to Gina, to Dr. Cross, to the station's chief of security, a retired human military officer named Jack Rivera who'd settled on Kepler after deciding he was tired of fighting other people's wars. Within 20 minutes, they were gathered in the station's operations center, a cramped room filled with monitoring equipment and half-empty coffee cups. Could be a hoax, Jack said, but he was already pulling up long-range scanner data. Some idiot's idea of a prank. At 3 in the morning with council-level encryption? Gina countered. She looked like she'd thrown on the first clothes she'd found, her usually neat hair sticking up at odd angles. Tyler, what did Eli do to that VRYN diplomat? The real version, not the sanitized story that's been going around. Tyler explained what Dr. Cross had witnessed. The glowing eyes, the impossible healing, Kristall's talk of ancient peoples and gifts that shouldn't exist. As he spoke, he watched Jack's expression shift from skepticism to grim acceptance. So the council wants him because he's special, Jack said. Because he can do things that scare them. Yeah, that tracks with everything I learned about how power works during my military days. Question is, what do we do about it? We don't let them take him, Tyler said immediately. Eli is my son. He's our family. You don't just hand over family because someone in authority says to. Tyler, this is the Galactic Council, Dr. Cross said gently. They have legal jurisdiction over every station, every planet and civilized space. If they want Eli, they have the authority to take him. Then maybe their authority is wrong, Gina said sharply. Eli has lived here for 16 years. He's helped every single person on this station at one point or another. The Colthan traders trust him to mediate their contracts. The VRWNN crews always ask if he's available to help with their repairs because he somehow knows what they need before they finish explaining it. He's brought this community together in ways that shouldn't be possible, and now the council wants to lock him away because he's inconvenient. Jack was typing rapidly on his console, pulling up station rosters and docking schedules. We've got 273 permanent residents right now, plus another 140 visitors from various ships currently docked. That's a lot of people, but against council security? He shook his head. They'll have training, equipment, legal authority. Best case scenario, we negotiate for them to take Eli peacefully and some of us don't end up arrested for interfering with council operations. I'm not negotiating, Tyler said flatly. And I'm not letting them take my son. Then we need a plan that doesn't get everyone killed or imprisoned, Jack replied. Dr. Cross, start spreading the word quietly. I want everyone awake and informed before that ship arrives. Gina, your cafe is the biggest common space we've got. Make it available. Tyler, you need to talk to Eli. He deserves to know what's coming. Finding Eli was easy. He was already awake, sitting in the small quarters he shared with Tyler, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. He looked up when Tyler entered, and those golden eyes were troubled in a way Tyler hadn't seen since Eli was small and trying to understand why some species feared humans. I can feel them coming, Eli said quietly. I don't know how I know, but there are people on their way here and they're afraid. Not of danger, but of what it means if I exist. Dad, what's happening to me? Tyler sat down beside his son and put an arm around his shoulders. Nothing is happening to you. You've always been special, Eli. We just didn't know how special or what it might mean. But I need you to listen to me now, okay? The council is sending people to take you away. They're scared of what you can do, scared of questions your existence might raise. But we're not going to let that happen without a fight. I don't want anyone getting hurt because of me, Eli said. If they have legal authority, maybe I should just go. Maybe it'll be okay. And maybe it won't, Tyler said firmly. Maybe they'll lock you away and study you like some kind of experiment. Maybe they'll make you disappear to keep their secrets safe. I'm not willing to gamble with your life, son. Are you? By the time the Council security ship appeared on long-range scanners, Station Kepler had transformed. The docking bay where they'd be required to port had been packed with people. Humans, Kolthan, Vioranin, Sesic, species that barely had names in Standard Galactic, all standing shoulder to shoulder. They held no weapons, but their presence was its own statement. Gina's Cafe had become a command center where Jack coordinated communications. And throughout the station, in every corridor and junction, more people waited. The Council ship was sleek and official, marked with insignia that proclaimed its authority. It docked smoothly, professionally, and after a moment the airlock cycled open. 6 figures emerged in Council security uniforms, 4 humans, 1 Kolthan, and 1 Sesic. They moved with the careful precision of people trained for confrontation but hoping to avoid it. Leading them was a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and the bearing of someone who'd followed orders for too long without questioning them. Diane Foster stopped when she saw the crowd filling the docking bay. Her hand didn't move toward her weapon, but her team spread out slightly, instinctively taking defensive positions. Tyler stepped forward from the crowd, and beside him stood Eli, those golden eyes reflecting the harsh station lights. "I'm Commander Foster, Council Security," the woman said, her voice projected to carry. "I'm here under official authority to retrieve Eli Hayes for transport to Council Central Station. This is not negotiable. Stand aside." "No," Tyler said simply. The word echoed through the bay, and behind him hundreds of voices repeated it. "No." Diane's jaw tightened. "Sir, you're interfering with Council operations. That carries serious legal consequences. I understand your attachment to the boy, but this is beyond your authority to prevent." "He's my son," Tyler said. "And he's their family." He gestured to the crowd behind him. "You want to take him, you're going to have to go through all of us. And I guarantee that footage of Council security dragging a 16-year-old away from his community will be on every news network in the galaxy within hours." Diane studied the crowd, and Tyler saw something shift in her expression. She'd expected resistance maybe, but not this. Not hundreds of beings from dozens of species standing united, not the quiet determination in their faces. Her team looked to her for orders, hands near weapons but not drawing them. "Commander," Eli said suddenly, stepping forward. His voice was calm, but Tyler could hear the tremor underneath. "Why does the Council fear me? I haven't hurt anyone. I helped a dying diplomat. Why does that make me dangerous?" Diane opened her mouth to give some official response, but then she really looked at Eli. At those golden eyes that held more sadness than fear. At a boy who was willing to turn himself over to prevent violence. Something in her carefully maintained professional armor cracked. "Because you're proof of their greatest shame," she said quietly, and her team turned to stare at her in shock. "Because 10,000 years ago, the Council destroyed your people rather than share power with them. And if you exist, if your gifts exist, then every species in the galaxy will start asking why beings like you aren't leading instead of the politicians who've been maintaining control through careful division." The words fell into the bay like stones into still water, ripples spreading outward as their meaning registered. Diane pulled out a data chip and held it toward Tyler. "These are the classified files about the Aurum. Everything the Council has hidden for millennia. I was supposed to read them so I'd understand what I was retrieving. Instead, they showed me what I was really doing, helping to bury the truth one more time." She looked back at her team. "I'm not taking this boy. Anyone who wants to can report me when we get back. I'm done following orders that make me complicit in kidnapping kids to protect corrupt systems." Her team exchanged glances. Then one by one they stepped back from their defensive positions. The Kolthan member actually smiled. "About time someone said it, Commander." Diane turned back to Eli. "The Council will send others. Bigger teams with less conscience. You've bought yourself time but not safety. Use it wisely." As the security team returned to their ship and undocked, leaving the data chip behind, Station Kepler erupted in cautious celebration. But Eli stood quietly, staring at his hands again, knowing that everything was about to change. The data chip that Diane Foster left behind contained more than just historical records. It held testimony from the founding Council members themselves, recorded 10,000 years ago in formats so old that Dr. Cross had to dig through the station's archives to find equipment that could even read it. When they finally managed to access the files, Tyler, Eli, Gina, Jack, and a handful of trusted station residents gathered in the operations center to watch history unfold on flickering holographic displays. The recordings showed Council chambers from an era when everything looked newer, cleaner, more optimistic. And there, standing among the politicians and diplomats, were people with golden eyes. The Orem. They spoke with quiet authority about trade agreements and territorial disputes, and Tyler watched species that had been at war for generations actually listen to each other when an Orem facilitated the conversation. It wasn't mind control or manipulation, it was pure understanding, the ability to help people see past their own biases and fears to find common ground. Then the recordings shifted to private meetings, council members speaking in hushed tones about the Orem problem. About how their influence was growing too strong, how species were beginning to defer to Orem judgment over council authority, how the peacekeepers were becoming more essential than the government itself. The fear in those ancient politicians' voices was palpable, and it made Tyler's stomach turn. They weren't afraid of conquest or violence. They were afraid of becoming irrelevant. The final recording showed the decision being made. The Orem would be scattered across primitive worlds, their populations divided so thoroughly that their gifts would dilute over generations. Earth was mentioned specifically, a planet whose dominant species showed promise but was still thousands of years from space flight. Perfect for hiding people you wanted lost. The council members who voted for this called it a difficult but necessary choice. They called it protecting the galaxy's independence. But watching their faces, Tyler saw it for what it really was. Powerful people eliminating a threat to their power. Eli watched all of this in silence, his golden eyes reflecting the holographic light. When the recordings ended, he stood and walked out without a word. Tyler found him an hour later in the cargo bay where he'd been discovered as an infant, sitting on the same supply crate, staring at nothing. "I understand now why they're afraid," Eli said when Tyler sat beside him. "My ancestors weren't conquerors, but in some ways they were more dangerous to people in power. They made unity possible. They made people believe that different species could actually understand each other without politicians managing every interaction. That's terrifying if your entire authority is built on being the necessary mediator." "What are you going to do?" Tyler asked quietly. Eli was quiet for a long moment. Diane was right. The council will send more people, and eventually they'll send people who won't hesitate to use force. I can't let this station become a battlefield because of me. But I also can't just disappear and let them bury the truth again. He looked at his father, and there was something ancient in those eyes, as if the genetic memories of his people were speaking through him. "I need to go to them. To the council chambers. But not as a prisoner. As someone demanding answers." "That's suicide," Jack said from the doorway. They hadn't heard him approach. "You walk into Council Central, they'll lock you up before you finish your first sentence." "Not if the whole galaxy is watching," Gina added, stepping in behind Jack. Apparently the whole group had followed Tyler. "Not if we make sure every news network, every independent reporter, every social media channel knows exactly where Eli is going and why. The council can handle a lot of things in secret, but they can't make someone disappear when billions of people are waiting to hear what they have to say." Dr. Cross pulled out her personal communicator. "I know a journalist on Sector News Network. She's been trying to break into major stories for years. This would make her career." Over the next 6 hours, Station Kepler became the center of a communications storm. The story of the human boy with golden eyes who could heal broken minds spread across the networks like wildfire. Diane Foster's testimony, released anonymously, added credibility. The historical files, carefully edited to remove the most sensitive security information but keeping the damning testimony, went viral. By the time a transport ship arrived to carry Eli to Council Central, chartered by Sector News Network and filled with reporters and camera equipment, the entire galaxy was watching. The journey took 3 days, and Eli spent most of it learning to manage the genetic memories that were flooding through him. He could feel his ancestors' experiences like echoes in his mind, countless acts of mediation, of healing, of bringing understanding to situations that seemed hopeless. The Orem hadn't been perfect, but they genuinely believed in the possibility of unity. That belief was now his inheritance and his burden. Tyler insisted on coming along with Gina, Jack, and Dr. Cross. Station Kepler had taken up a collection to fund their passage, with species from across the station contributing whatever they could afford. It wasn't about the money, it was about making sure Eli knew his family stood with him. Council Central Station was massive, a structure that dwarfed anything Eli had ever seen. It housed the administrative heart of galactic civilization, and its chambers had witnessed 10,000 years of political maneuvering. Security tried to stop them at multiple checkpoints, but the presence of cameras and reporters made casual detention impossible. By the time they reached the main council chamber, millions of beings across dozens of worlds were streaming the coverage live. The chamber itself was circular and vast, with seats rising in tiers around a central platform. Council members filled those seats, some in person, others projected holographically from distant locations. Chancellor Vorith stood at the center, their ancient features tight with controlled anger. But they couldn't refuse Eli entry, not with the galaxy watching. Eli walked to the center platform, his golden eyes sweeping across the assembled council. He could feel their fear, their resentment, their desperate desire to maintain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond their authority. And underneath it all, buried deep, he could sense shame. They knew what their predecessors had done. Some of them had even known the truth before these revelations forced it into the light. "My name is Eli Hayes," he said, his voice amplified by the chamber's systems and broadcast across the galaxy. "I was found as an infant on a maintenance station on the edge of civilized space. For 16 years, I believed I was just a human with unusual eyes. Now I know I'm the descendant of people called the Aurum, people this council deliberately scattered and erased because their gift for bringing unity threatened political power." Vorith started to speak, but Eli continued, his words cutting through the attempted interruption. "I'm not here to demand vengeance or punishment. I'm not here to destroy the council or call for revolution. I'm here to ask a simple question. Why are you so afraid of people understanding each other?" The chamber went silent. It was such a simple question, so direct and honest, that it stripped away all the political complexity and forced everyone to confront the core issue. "The council maintains order," Vorith finally said. "We mediate disputes, enforce laws, protect the rights of member species. Without us, the galaxy would descend into chaos." "Would it?" Eli asked. "Or would species find ways to understand each other without needing politicians to manage every interaction? My ancestors didn't replace governments, they helped people communicate better. They made understanding possible. Why is that dangerous?" "Because understanding without structure is naive," another council member argued. "Species have different needs, different values. Conflicts are inevitable. The council provides the framework for resolving those conflicts fairly." Eli felt the genetic memories stirring, showing him thousands of mediations his ancestors had facilitated. The Aurum didn't eliminate conflict. They helped people navigate it honestly. There's a difference between mediating disputes and ensuring disputes continue so you remain necessary. Which one has this council been doing for the past 10,000 years? The accusation landed like a physical blow. Across the chamber, younger council members were staring at their elders with dawning comprehension. Petra Lang stood, her voice carrying clearly. "He's right. I've served on this council for 15 years, and I've watched us carefully maintain balance rather than push for actual resolution. We keep species dependent on our mediation instead of helping them develop their own channels for communication. We've become managers of controlled conflict rather than facilitators of peace." "That's an oversimplification," Vorith protested, but their voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Eli asked. He stepped forward, and though he was just one young human facing the assembled power of galactic government, his presence commanded the chamber. "I'm offering you the same choice my ancestors once offered your predecessors. You can continue as you are, maintaining power through careful management of division. Or you can acknowledge that the galaxy has outgrown the need for that kind of control. You can step back and let species build genuine understanding with each other, with people like me helping where we're needed, not where we're profitable for politicians." "And if we refuse?" Vorith asked quietly. Eli smiled, and there was something sad but determined in that expression. "Then you've already lost. Because I'm not the only one with Aurum blood. Earth alone has 8 billion humans, and we've been scattered across colonized space for generations now. Somewhere in that genetic diversity, there are others like me. The memories are waking up. You can't suppress us all, and you can't keep the truth buried anymore. The galaxy knows what you did. The only question now is whether you adapt to the change or get swept away by it." The debate that followed went on for hours, broadcast live across every major network. Species that had never questioned council authority began organizing independent diplomatic channels. Young politicians began calling for reform. The carefully maintained structure that had governed galactic civilization for millennia began to shift, slowly but inexorably, like a glacier finally feeling the warmth of spring. The council didn't fall, but it transformed. New protocols were established requiring transparency in conflict mediation. Independent observers were added to sensitive negotiations. And most significantly, a new office was created, the Office of Understanding, tasked with identifying and training individuals with natural gifts for communication and mediation. Eli was offered the position of founding director. He accepted on one condition: that he could return to Station Kepler regularly, because that ragtag community of misfits and wanderers was still his home. Tyler watched his son address the Reformed Council 6 months later, explaining new mediation initiatives, and felt pride swell in his chest. The boy he'd found in a cargo bay had become the symbol of a new era. Station Kepler became a hub for training the next generation of mediators, drawing students from across the galaxy who wanted to learn Eli's approach to understanding. Gina's cafe expanded to accommodate the influx of visitors. Dr. Cross started documenting Orem medical abilities for academic journals. Jack trained security personnel in de-escalation techniques that emphasized understanding over force. The station that had raised one special child was now helping to raise a more connected galaxy. And sometimes, late at night when the station was quiet, Eli would return to that cargo bay and sit on that old supply crate. He'd think about the people who'd left him there 16 years ago, trusting that someone would find him and care for him. He'd think about his ancestors, scattered and erased but never truly gone. And he'd think about Tyler and the community that had given him everything: family, purpose, and the courage to stand before the galaxy's power and demand better. His golden eyes reflected the stars visible through the bay windows, ancient and young at the same time, carrying the promise that understanding was always possible if people were willing to try. The Council had feared that promise once. Now, finally, the galaxy was learning to embrace it.